Hi, everyone. I don't know if I have a tagline for this show yet, but someday we will come up with one. So today, this is it. Anyway, welcome to another episode of Sci-Fi Breakdown, and we are going to talk about a very interesting topic that I have not leaked to the public yet, except for like maybe a couple people. I'm bad about that. And hey, as expected, we got Richard in the chat. We also got
What up?
Kyle in the chat.
What up?
Anyone else that wants to be in the chat, I'm sorry. You probably have better things to do than watch us talk about philosophy and science. But here we are. We're gonna do it anyway. What's up,
That's right.
SR? How are you doing?
Oh man, I am excited. I gotta say, that intro is just freaking awesome, man. That is a really, really great intro. So that always gets me pumped, and I'm ready to commit a lot of fallacies. I've got a list of them right next to me. I'm hoping to check off all of them. So you're wrong because you're stupid. So
Is that the fallacy of the week?
yeah. It was just starting off right there with some ad hominems. Yep.
Oh, it's my favorite. It's my favorite fallacy. Okay, so I've got one topic in particular that we agreed to talk about, but if we run out of things to say with that, we can come up with more topics as well, which is why I have not labeled this episode. I will go back and label it afterwards with the topics we discussed. But I wanted to share something very personal with the audience, and it's I have a belief, and I just need none of you to judge me about this. But I just think that there are okay. So the pyramid things in Egypt. Have you seen those?
The big
SR, are you
stone,
familiar?
big stone ones. Yeah.
Well, you know how it's really difficult to move big blocks like that
It is. Yeah.
up to like really tall places. So I have a belief that aliens did that.
Yeah. Okay. I wish we would have. I wish I would have asked these questions of you, Ben, before I started becoming your friend. But I just would have radically changed the course of this relationship. Okay. So you think aliens built the pyramids? Why?
Yeah.
Why exactly?
Why? Because there's no other possible way that could have been built. Okay.
So the first thing that would come to my mind in this scenario is that I would say the problem of underdetermination is this huge issue where the idea of ever being able to rule out literally all other possibilities just seems to be something we can't do, right? And to hinge a belief, no matter what claim, to hinge that on the idea of it just can't be anything else is you just not imagining more, not being able to imagine something different outside of what you've seen, which is understandable. I mean, it makes sense for people, right? But that literally is just the fallacy of incredulity. Just saying, oh, I couldn't think of how else this big mountain got here, so it has to be whatever my claim is, without actually ever substantiating the claim. So that would be the first thing that came to mind with that. In terms of just like the actual like argument itself. I mean, what I would say if somebody actually called in and said that, is I would say, okay, so you're saying that there couldn't be any other way that the pyramids got built other than with aliens, like alien technology, I'm assuming is what you're going for. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think. Okay. Have you, I guess before we get super far into this, have you had any callers that believe in aliens?
So yeah, I've taken a couple of calls that believed in aliens. I don't know that I've ever had a conversation, a call where somebody is like an ancient astronaut theorist, that type, where they're really focusing on ancient structures that aliens helped participate in, or culture or anything. Like, the only reason we ever invented writing was because aliens gave it to us. Like, I mean, maybe.
Yeah, it's very out there of a claim.
Yeah,
And the whole topic of today's episode is aliens in a broad sense. So we have a lot of places we can go with this.
Yeah.
But I wanted to focus probably most of the time on the claims that aliens are interacting with us. Because I mean, having the claim that there are forms of life outside of our solar system, like, okay, we can have that debate. We can have that mental masturbation of what is the likelihood that something like that exists.
Right.
But what is the utility of having that conversation that's not falsifiable?
Sure.
Like, if it has no way to interact with us, why do we need to expend energy to talk about something that has no impact on us? Whereas
Yeah.
taking something that is like claiming that these aliens are number one, like that they care enough to come find us, or if they're doing something out there to be in the vicinity, and then also that they are realistically interacting with the world we live in, because that's something that can be falsified. So I think that's why we're going to head in that direction, because it's more easy to engage and you actually have something to engage with them on in that case.
Yeah, I totally agree, in the sense of, I mean, you know much more about the biology side behind it, but like the idea of the most simple, basic construction of what is biotic material just on any one of the other rocks orbiting a freaking star that has enough heat, that has whatever the components are, blah, 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 blah. Like that, yeah, the possibility of that is just is very high. And that's all well and good, because it doesn't come into play until what we're saying is they're doing something with us. Like, the idea of saying, oh, well, when I say aliens, when I say, distant life forms, all I'm talking about are like comets that have like a handful of microbes. It's like, okay, yes. But if you're going from that to then saying, and that's why aliens have been regularly abducting, my neighbors, like
Mhm.
every third Wednesday of the month, and doing, alien experiments and stuff. That's where it matters. Um so yeah, what
Would you almost say that, like, because this is, I'm not a philosopher. I don't study the philosophies. I don't study the theologies. But it almost sounds like to me that this difference between, like, there's life somewhere
Mhm.
and like there's life now interacting with us, it's almost like a similar contrast between like deism and
Mhm.
other forms of theism. It's almost like there's life on these other planets, but
Yeah.
we don't interact with them. It's almost like the deism of alien belief to an extent.
Yeah, I think I really do. I would say that's a fair analogy. Because yeah, there are many people out there that would say, like, definitely, like, they would say 100% even, like, there is other life forms out there. Where again, I would take the claim that it seems very likely, but we don't have any actual reason to conclude it just yet. But categorically ruling it out seems, way wrong, way outside of what we know about just basic biology and the universe. Um, but yeah, when it comes to the idea of like organisms that live on some freaking planet in a solar system and galaxy so far away that we will literally never be able to get the light from it. Like, who gives a crap? What does that matter? Like, that's awesome that they're there and good for them. And if 5 billion years from now, this recording is still saved, I'd like to shout out to those other living organisms in the universe. But at the same time, I'm not expecting a response by the end of the video. So, you know. We'll see. Maybe
what
my
if
whole. Go
what
ahead.
if we are the aliens?
Well, so I mean, yeah, the idea that life on Earth was started through microbes from a distant galaxy hitching a ride on a comet or asteroid type thing. Yeah, I mean that's talked about by a good handful of different people, and I don't think that I don't think with that there's anything necessarily like untrue, problematic. Really, like it's just one of those things where it's back to kind of the unfalsifiable thing. Like we can't really ever. I don't know how we would ever find something that would positively indicate that that's where life came from. And even if it did, we're still not getting at kind of generally what is the crux of the issue when it comes to life on Earth,
Mhm.
right? It's like, how
Mhm.
did life get here? It's like, well, it already existed and then it just landed here in a spaceship. It's like, okay, but where do the people on the spaceship come from? That's
Where
kind
did the
of,
spaceship come from?
that's kind
How
of,
did it get the
that's
spaceship?
more interesting. Like, okay, if what
Yeah.
happened is an alien drove by in a spaceship and like dropped off its kids and then left, and that's what populated the Earth, like, great, but we really have a lot more to ask about now. Which again, it's only important if the aliens are just passing by and they're never talking to us, then their existence kind of isn't super worthwhile for us to discuss. It's
Mhm.
only when they are screwing with us or giving us great technology to advance us, or building pyramids and things. I mean, seems like what you would do as a colonizer of a new world. So I don't know.
So let's say you're on the perspective, or you're on uh Talkie Then or Truth Wanted or whatever show you're on that is, and you get a caller that says that they believe that aliens interact with our world in
Mhm.
significant ways. Um what kind of approach would you take to a caller like that, knowing that you come from a more like logical standpoint in terms of like philosophy and more classical logic? How would you engage? Would you be able to rely on some of your philosophy, or do you need to change directions a little bit? How would you approach it?
Yeah, I think there is some good things from both our sides, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts in a second on um and I think I have a good bridge to this. So one of the first things I would do basically is I would try to figure out exactly what the claim is. Like the claim itself that aliens are interacting with us. Um we've already kind of touched on a handful of the things that we could say, like, okay, so aliens are interacting with us. Are you know what exactly are you meaning by that? Where are they interacting? What are you saying by aliens? That type of stuff. But really, this concept of aliens messing with people, again, is kind of the minimum criteria for us to care. So we do just kind of have to accept, like, okay, let's say they are. What is exactly the nature of that interaction, right? If we go the route of kind of what you were saying earlier with the pyramids, it's this idea of oh, we have this fuzzy video and we don't know what this thing is, and it behaves in a manner that seems to be counter to all physics and logic and science, therefore it must be aliens. Well, that's again just incredulity. It's just saying I can't think of what else it could be. And it's also, if you're saying, oh, we have this one video that we haven't figured out, and we have this one video we haven't figured out, um, you're just counting the hits and ignoring the misses. Just the sharpshooter fallacy there. You're picking out 3 videos that haven't yet been debunked, when the literal thousands of other videos that are being put out there as evidence are consistently getting debunked over and over again. Um, that being said, if we were going to a route of, so the first thing, we'd have to nail down exactly how they're interacting, right? And if we're going those kinds of routes with we have videos, you know, or I had an experience. Okay, that's a personal experience. Would you accept it if somebody else said that they had a personal experience that was directly counter to yours? If you're saying no there, why aren't you being consistent here? Um, but a lot of times there are the claims that there is something physical going on, in the sense of somebody has bruises, or somebody has scratches on them or something, you know, like a piece of something is now stuck in their neck that they woke up with, right? They have this bump on their
Mm,
neck. They've never seen it before. And I think that's where where you know, your way of looking at this would be incredibly helpful, and trying to break down and say, what are all the potential options here, medically speaking, for these issues?
mm,
So again, if we nail down the nature of the claim, how these aliens are actually interacting with us, and then there's a couple of different handful of ways that we could easily point to some fallacies. Again, sharpshooter one, we picked a couple that felt good to us and we said, haha, this proves it. And we just discounted the other arrows that completely missed the target.
mm,
Or just, hey, I can't think of what else it could be. Oh, okay, incredulity there. Oh, well, I had this one personal experience, but I wouldn't accept a counter experience by somebody else. Okay, personal experience. So
mm.
all of that right there is just some easy, you know, I think most of us are pretty familiar with all of those kinds of problems, logically speaking, right?
Mm.
So what would I'm going to ask you, what is a good way for me to respond if somebody says that they had these particular bruises, or they had something
Mm.
under their neck, or they had you know,
Yeah.
scratches or something? How do I how would I say back to them, like, no, that scratch is consistent
So
with, yeah.
I developed this approach, and this is, and when I say I developed it, I just adapted something that I was already taught for this situation.
You can
Um,
copyright it.
yeah, it's so in medical school we learn this method. They call it SOAP, SOAP, and it's how you essentially format your note for it. Because when you're writing medical documentation, you are essentially giving an argument to whoever's reading it that this is what is going on and this is why the treatment I used is appropriate. You have to justify that, because if you go to court or something, they need to be able to look back and say, is this consistent with what you found? And did you take the right
Mm,
steps? You need to be able to check what you did. So this method organizes things and helps you think through what it's going to be, helps you explain why it is what you think it is. But I think you can apply this also to calls, and I've done this on the perspective with you and other people. But S stands for subjective. So, like in medicine, this is when you are asking them about their experience. And in the same way
mm,
with these kinds of claims, like you start off by saying, can you describe your experience? And you let them talk. This is when you can exhibit some empathy as well and let them know that you're not there to just debate them. You're there to listen to them and you want
sure.
to know truth. So you let them talk, you let them share um, their viewpoints. And in this, uh, while you're not saying anything, you can pick up on some really important details just based on how they tell the story, what details they
Mm,
highlight. Um, for example, if something is a big deal to somebody, like let's say that there's a crop circle in their backyard, and that's something that they keep going back to, there's something there probably that is meaningful with that particular piece of evidence in their mind, and that's going to be something you're going to want to focus on later on because that matters to them. So being able to listen to that, and then making sure that during the subjective piece that you are asking questions that allow them to be like openly speaking. You want open-ended questions a lot of the time,
mm,
so that they're you're not backing them into a corner, unless they're being an absolute dickhead, in which case I will freely back them into a corner. But usually with the alien callers, I don't feel like we get a lot of those kinds of people.
not
Uh,
normally.
yeah, so you can ask them questions like, what was going on at the time that you had this experience, or
Mm,
who else was with you? Like those kinds of things. Like what time of day was it? What were you feeling at that time? Things that are subjective that their experience would play into. Because while it's not something that can necessarily be measured, it can be helpful. And you can't draw conclusions based on subjective alone, but you can apply that and see how well it matches up with the objective. And that's, yeah.
So because there's a lot in the, for sure, anybody on the philosophy bro side, man, there's a lot of us that will really harp on subjective and objective and how important one is and how worthless the other is. You're saying that while the subjective things that you're asking from this patient to describe to you, that piece of information is not in and of itself enough to push you in one direction as to what the conclusion is, but it is weighed in the evidence. It is still important, and it can be ultimately something that helps you decide.
Yeah, like take pain. Pain is a great example of this because pain is subjective. But like apart from my physical exam findings, like if I know they have a broken leg or whatever,
Sure.
like that's something I could find out. But understanding severity of a condition, like if they normally are able to walk a mile every day and that's part of their normal activity, but now they say they can only walk to the bathroom and back, that's a significant change, and that's impactful on their ability to live their life. It's subjective. I don't have a definitive verification that they can do that, but the fact that they are limited and they are saying that they are limited now, that should be taken into account with what I do. If somebody previously walked a mile a day, but now is walking like 0.8 of a mile a day, okay, they might be limited, but not as limited as somebody who can no longer get out of bed. Like, and especially taking a child, like you see that's a lot with pediatric medicine, where kids can't really tell you what's going on, but you can see a kid go, if a kid says that they're sick and can't go to school, but they're out playing just fine, they might not be as sick as the kid who's normally out playing, who's now on the couch and won't move. Like it's subjective, but it's meaningful. And you take that into account when you're going into the objective part. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, I think it was freaking awesome. That was why I kind of had that leading question, because I thought you were gonna say something. That was good, man. Yeah, I think that was important. So, but keep going. Give me the next in the soap.
So we had subjective. You get that out of the way, and then now you move on to objective, and this is, of course, the objective findings. This is what we can demonstrate, what we can see, what we can evaluate. So things with an alien encounter, and while we're still on this point of a personal experience,
right,
this is where you could go look at the crop circle in their backyard. You could go see the lights. You could see the picture of the lights. You could do an evaluation of their psychological state. You can do things that will tell you more about what's going on and things that we can verify are real. So whether or not it was an alien that caused the crop circle in the backyard, you can at least verify that there is something in the backyard, and we might not know what did it, but we have evidence that it's there.
Yeah, because that is important. If the claim hinges on, hey, there was a crop circle that appeared in my backyard, and we go to the backyard and there definitely is not a circle, that kind of, what they saw, again, may not be as important. But if they said, hey, well, I heard this really loud noise and it all these lights, and there was this crop circle, and we go find the crop circle, well, okay, that subjective experience now is maybe weighed a little bit, more in line with that, right? Because there is that crop circle,
and it's consistent.
Yeah,
like we know that they're and something to think about too is their line of reasoning, knowing how linear it is, and if they can go from one point, like if they something that's subjective that relates to the objective and at least causes a reasonable logical thought pattern to get there, that tells me something different than if somebody says I saw aliens, and then I don't know, there's some disconnect between, like, they say there's a crop circle, but actually, like, there's a food truck out in the back. Like there's a difference in thought process, and you can gauge whether or not somebody has the ability to think those steps through. If
Yeah.
something's consistent within itself, probably more likely to have some evidence behind it than things that are not consistent between the subjective and the objective.
Yeah. Again, that's helpful. Okay. So if somebody came in and said, like, and was like demonstrating on their arm like a handful of scratches, deep scratches, and they said, here's the subjective. I was walking out my back porch, I stepped onto the grass, an alien jumped out from the bush and scratched the crap out of me and put my DNA into a vial for a sample, like testing. And then they were beamed up into the spaceship. All of this right in front of me. All of it happened yesterday. Look, I've got the scars to prove it. What would you do with that? Would you try to?
I mean, the question is, like, again, there with are these things consistent? Like, if someone were to say specifically, if I were to ask them, what did the aliens do to give you those scars? And if they said, I was injected with a needle, I would expect to see a particular, like, wound that it would be different than if somebody was stabbed with a knife. I would be able to see something different. So are they consistent? And if they're not, maybe that leads me to thinking that there's another cause, and something that's more depressing to bring up, but a case where we have to utilize this thought process frequently is in abuse cases, where somebody says that they got this injury from falling down some stairs, and they have some, I don't know, like, if they say they fell downstairs, but they have, like, cigarette burns, those aren't consistent. They don't line up. You find patterns that don't really make sense, and you can't rely solely on patterns to draw conclusions, but your suspicion can change based on
Absolutely.
a pattern.
Absolutely. And it's helpful to remember that, be simply saying that a pattern has been consistent and it would be reasonable to conclude something based on that pattern is not the black swan fallacy, right? And I think a lot of people always get that confused, and they say, well, just because this happened in the past doesn't mean it happens. And you're like, correct. That is 100% correct. But exactly like what you were saying, there's a difference in the way that the body responds to various traumas, right? So a cut from a metal object, let's say, on the arm versus a scratch or a cut from a fingernail would present differently. That would be a little bit different in terms of how the physiology would be, right? Like the actual mark on the skin, where it comes from, how deep and so forth. And that is important. That type of stuff is really important, especially in a case like you were talking about. That's good, man. You're killing it with this. Okay.
But I did want to mention something too. I think with the black swan fallacy, I think like you can absolutely commit that fallacy depending on what you do with the pattern you have. Like if I said I have this pattern, therefore conclusion, that would be the black swan fallacy. But if I were to correctly use the scientific method, what I should do is I have a pattern, so I now have a hypothesis. That's what you should do, and then you should evaluate. So the pattern does not lead to a conclusion, because that's a fallacy.
Right.
But if I have the pattern and it leads to a question, that's different. Or it leads to a prediction, that's different. But that's assuming that you are going to then evaluate it and actually, gather evidence to prove or disprove your point.
Right. Right. And again, exactly. It wouldn't be reasonable to say this is the conclusion based on that, but it would be fair for somebody to say it makes the most sense. We would look here. And again, that just it really isn't you making the conclusion this is the answer. It's you saying this is kind of where we would start based on the things we've seen in the past.
That's actually, this is a little bit off topic, but this is something that I was getting in a little bit of a debate with people on Twitter about, and like it's related to fallacies. And like I don't think people understand that you can have a statement that's true and still make a fallacious argument with it. Like it's the application of how you're using that information. Specifically, this one was related to a slippery slope fallacy. And I was calling out specific arguments, not pointing out whether or not it was a true statement, but just saying this reasoning is not the best. As it was saying like this was related to the Roe v. Wade stuff going on.
Yeah.
And like I've seen the actual like the way people would phrase it was like they're taking away abortion, so then they're going to take away marriage equality. I was like, well, even if that's true, even if they want to do that, saying that that is a result and is therefore the next step in the sequence of this first thing, that's where it's a fallacy. And then someone had said, well, but they have said that they're going to take that away. Like, okay, but then you need to formulate a different argument, because then the argument is they made this statement that they're going to take this away, so they're probably going to take it away. That's a different argument than they made this argument, like they did this thing, and then the next step is going to be this other completely different thing. Like they both might be true, but the way it was phrased and the way it was argued is like, and that's where, like we've talked about this before, validity and soundness.
That's
Like, so
exactly what I was
while
gonna
it might
say.
be sound, it's still not valid. It wasn't a
Yes.
valid way of presenting it.
Yes, and that doesn't mean that you pushing back on this with whoever this was, wherever it was, right? But you pushing back on that isn't you trying to say you're incorrect, right? It isn't really you trying to say, because again, the truth of it isn't really what you're talking about. You're talking about the simple mathematical equation of it. And I'm telling you that this isn't a sign, this isn't a plus or a minus or a divide sign thing here. You've got these terms backwards. You got to have that. That's what I'm going for. I'm not saying that you're wrong that there's 7 jelly beans in the jar in front of us, because we both see the jar and we both counted it. I'm saying that you did an equation that has some problems in it, and yes, it's correct. But yeah, no, I think it is valuable for that, because we want to be as accurate as possible. And if we're using fallacious reasoning to get to a conclusion, whether or not we like that conclusion and whether or not that conclusion is actually already having presented itself, right? Again, yes, there are statements by many people in our government right now, absolutely ridiculous things of like, hey, now that we've done this, we are going to move towards this. But it is not, the reason that that's happening is not because the first restriction leads to the second restriction. It's just that these dickheads have stated that's what they want to do. So,
Yeah.
but again, yes, important to make sure that we are always both valid and sound, and they are talking about different things. And that was kind of why Ben came up with this cool idea. So I've derailed you.
We've
Already.
It's okay. It's okay.
We're on A.
We're on A. A is where it gets fun, because this is where it's collaborative. Like we've already done our little investigative work and collected our data. And then now is the assessment. And this is where you get to say, all right, what are the possibilities that would cause these things? So you go back to your subjective, you go back to your objective, you lay all of that out and you say, what would cause these? And then you just list all of your options and you tell the other person, like you try to encourage them to give ideas as well. And sometimes they'll be nervous by this point, because especially if they don't have if they have one idea and they haven't even thought about any alternatives. I mean, that's the whole point of this, is to kind of lower their confidence in their one idea and cause them to look elsewhere as well. So you can even pose an idea yourself, like, I don't know, you got this crop circle. I think it might have been like somebody picked up a lawnmower and made some art in your yard, and then they might submit another idea. Like, of course, they have their alien idea.
Right, aliens.
They might also say, I don't know, that pixies did it. Like, you can submit, like, it doesn't matter how correct any of these ideas are. It doesn't matter how likely they are, because in the next step, you're going to go through and determine what the more likely causes are. So that's just the brainstorming phase. And you can have a variety of options that would cause all of them to happen together, or you could just address, like, you could include options that only explain one of the presentations. Like, you could say, let's say you have somebody with a beacon somewhere out there, like, that addresses the lights issue. It doesn't necessarily explain the crop circle, but it can at least, because it's possible that you have multiple things doing things at the same time. You don't always need one answer that fits all of your boxes.
Sure.
So,
and again, it's not to say that in this section we're able to list abso-freaking-lutely every possibility. That is not the case. But this is a very, very valuable step whenever we ourselves are making claims, or whenever other people are making claims. They're saying, this is what did X. And us just saying, oh, well, I thought of literally one other thing, and actually I'm going with the one other thing because it's no. Take a moment. How many other possibilities could it be? And I mean, I thought, yeah, what you said at the end right there, it being multiple things happening at once. Like, what if somebody picked up a weed whacker and there was a light show going on outside? Two totally separate events, don't have anything to do with each other, that would explain it. But again, we would need something to kind of point us in one of those directions, which I think might be where we're going to.
Yeah, and the whole point of all this is to decrease the likelihood that we would prematurely exclude a reasonable answer. Yeah. So it's to rule things in, but then also to slow our brains down, because we make patterns with our brains, and I call it cognitive laziness, because we don't want to think about things that we don't know. So we draw a conclusion so we don't have to do that step. And it's not us intentionally not wanting to do that step. It's just we don't think to do it. And so we need to slow down and not rush through a problem and say, hey, let's go from A to B to C instead of just going from A to C. What could be B? What could we use for B? If we're saying that A eventually leads to C, what are all the possibilities that B could be? And like, that's what we're trying to do. So then in the plan, which is P, you're going to go through and you're going to look back at your subjective and your objective once again. And you're going to say, based on our subjective and our objective findings, do we think that the weed whacker is a likely possibility? And if it's a yes, you leave it in. If it's a no, you can say, well, it's a no because this reason from the subjective or objective kind of makes it less likely. We're going to cross it off. Or this point makes it absolutely not the case that this could be possible. You cross that out. And then you kind of do that. And you don't have to rule out everything to get to one answer. Kind of a nice thing to do is to just get to maybe the three answers that you think are the most likely. And then at least you have three options. Yeah. Instead of just one. But and you might not even have an answer by the end of this, but you have things to think through when you leave the conversation. at least.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, I mean, we've already touched on it a little bit earlier, but yeah, we're never. It just seems to be the case that no matter what it is, we're never going to get to this like circled 100% certainty. We know for a
Mhm.
fact no other way. And in some scenarios we have the ability to maybe play around with that a little bit more and continue to try to find those extra options and stuff. Somebody calling in and talking about a crop circle in their backyard. Heck yeah. We can sit around. That's not really affecting anybody on an immediate traumatic, life-threatening basis, right? Um, but for instance, somebody coming into the hospital and let's say they're having intense pains in their abdomen, on one side or the other, whichever one is more problematic, and you know what I'm saying? Like it's like those types of things. It's um this process, while incredibly beneficial, you're not going to have as much certainty necessarily in the moment before doing some types of procedures or
Mm,
interventions, and that's okay. That's okay that is the case, because we know for a fact we're never going to have 100% certainty. um, but also we have to do something like in the next 5 minutes,
mhm,
or this is just literally going to be us just masturbating for the fun of it,
mhm,
right? Like we're
mhm.
just screwing around now. um but yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's easy. SOAP, soap.
Yeah, and then
um
the end of this, like once you've kind of picked your top 3 or however top many you wanna evaluate, like, you don't have to leave with an answer. You
mm,
can leave by saying, "What could I do or what evidence would I need to demonstrate option number 1 to be true, or
mhm,
option number 2 to be true, or option number 3 to be true?" And you can go through what test would I need to do to get that evidence to demonstrate if this number 1 possibility is true. And so then you have some homework. It's like, I have a method now that I could evaluate this claim.
mm,
And we've had our other possibilities, but now we have steps to move forward. How do we gather sufficient evidence to rule in or rule out something? And I think that's like, and then also, where do we go from here? What do we do with this information? If if I'm trying to determine if it's a weed whacker or um, pixies, what does differentiating between those two options? What is that going to do? If
mm,
I learn that it is the weed whacker and not the pixies, how does that change what I'm going to do about it? And if nothing's really going to change about what you do about it, you might not need to put in the work to investigate further,
mm,
because it might not be a good use of your time. But if it is going to change, if it's going to change how you interact with people, or it's going to change how you approach other questions in the future, or if you are a person that studies aliens and it's going to impact your studies,
mm,
then okay, it might be worth your time to put in that effort to definitively have an answer, or to get as close as possible. But you don't always have to do those next steps. But it gives you a way to move forward. And if you demonstrated through any of that, if you are able to demonstrate one of those claims to be true, then they can go into the next conversation and have an argument.
mhm.
And then they're not going through the same thing that they did of like, well, it just had to be this one. No, and well, now you have evidence.
And I think that standardized methodology of looking at everything like this as best you can, right? Again, there are some things where it's
Mhm.
like, you just found out that the brakes on your car have failed, and you're about to slide into a tree or something. You maybe don't have enough time to go through all the steps right there before you make the claim of, hey, we need to jump out of the car. Like, I understand this, folks. But at the same time, the reason that a standardized way of approaching claims and evaluating, what the potential options are, and trying to separate out those things that are subjective and objective, but still trying to find that through line that may connect some of these things together. The reason it's so valuable to have that methodology is because of the problem with the soundness. That's the whole point, right? We can spend all day crafting the best freaking syllogisms out there. But if what it turns out is, you come up with something that essentially says all dogs are triangles, all triangles are whale tortoise hybrids, therefore all dogs are whale turtle hybrids. It's like, I mean, logically speaking, the validity, I guess, is there, but it's just nonsense. It just doesn't have any bearing on reality. There is no relation to the real world around us. And that's why having that standardization of saying, well, how would I approach? Okay, so you said matter began at the whole universe began at the Big Bang, right? Okay, well, how would I approach that claim? You said that, God equals this, or God did this, or whatever. Well, how would I approach that claim? Oh, you said the Quran tells, is the holy word from Gabriel. Like, well, how would I approach that claim? Because it may be coherent in a logical sense. There may be nothing about it that has any problems with your standard, A equals A does not equal not A, no middle ground in between those. But that doesn't mean it actually has relation to reality. So I think that's a really, really good method, man, for everybody to try and utilize as much as possible. Again, I'm not telling you, you have to go to the bathroom and you need to go through this whole step process of like whether or not it's okay for you to use the public restroom. But
Well,
I don't
and
know.
there are times and places to use both of our methods and
Mhm.
all the other methods out there. There's certain people that are not going to respond to my method, and the thing is, like the way that I approached it just now requires a lot of collaboration and a lot of willingness to participate on their part. So if someone is not willing to participate, you really can't go anywhere with that kind of method. You
Mhm.
might have to be more aggressive in your approach and pointing out their fallacies and backing them into more of a corner to get them to even see that what they're doing is not logical.
Mhm.
But you have different people that require different methods, and that's why we do this show at all, is to show that there's no one right way to
Mhm.
approach a situation. There are plenty of wrong ways. um,
plenty
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 of
of
wrong
wrong ways.
ways.
Even when again you've got, just like you were saying earlier with the person that said, well, now that they've restricted Roe versus Wade, they're coming after this next, and they're coming after this. Like, that is, you are correct, but it's not because this restriction leads to that one. It's because they've just outright said this is the type of terrible people we want to be.
Mhm.
So it's really worthwhile to make sure that we're using the best freaking methods always from all sides. And if somebody comes up to us and says to us, "Hey man, your philosophy game is it's okay, man. You got it solid here, but did you hear about this study, this medical thing about liver? Because that would present a big problem." It's worthwhile to pay attention to that. So,
Also, it's important to know where your own weaknesses are in
mhm.
the way you approach things, because I mean, if I were to go on a show and I were to try to play philosophy bro for a little bit.
You
The
could do it.
assumption, there might be the assumption from the caller that I'm ready to discuss in that manner, and that that is the approach I'm taking, which it's not. It's absolutely not. I'm not ready to engage, especially if your caller is somebody who is well read and well studied on
Mhm.
the subjects. It's a great way to fall on your face and look really, really stupid because you approach something in a way that you're not comfortable discussing, and that's okay. Like, I'm not gonna ever like be SR, and that's fine. That's why we are separate people with separate ways of approaching it. But it's just like if you go to a foreign country that speaks Spanish and you speak in Spanish to somebody, and like maybe you know one sentence really really well, and you speak that first, they might speak to you back in Spanish because the assumption there is that you're ready to engage in that style of communication.
Yeah.
So if you want to engage in philosophy, sure, set yourself up for that, set them up for that. But if you're not ready to engage that way, set it up the way that you want to set it up. Like if you're coming to play a game of checkers, don't set up a chessboard because the rules aren't going to make sense. You're not going to play very well. So like I'm going to set it up in my SOAP method. I'm going to set it up scientifically where I know I can draw from how my brain works. But I'd rather them assume that I'm coming from that standpoint for them to assume that I'm gonna, because like if I were to be in a room with J Mike, I'm not gonna approach anything and make it seem like I'm trying to have a philosophical debate with J Mike because I would look so damn stupid.
Well, he's smart. He knows
like,
a lot.
I look so dumb. I don't want to set it up that way.
Yeah, and it is exactly what you were saying. It's really really worthwhile to just remember the fact that, like, yeah, other people focus on other things where you've spent, you know, the last 3 weeks doing X or the last 10 years of your life engaged with this, you know, particular method or this particular focus. That's awesome. But other people have done that too in other things. And it's really worthwhile if you want the strongest argument, if you want the most sound and valid understandings of the world around you, the best thing to do is try to go find those people and listen to them. It doesn't mean that you fall into this, oh, well, somebody just told me, and so therefore I believe it. But if somebody's really studied in anything, generally they'll give you references, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest things you do. And so from that, yeah, take a look at them, understand that again, you're not at the capacity to necessarily. I sure as hell couldn't look at somebody's like medical chart and like make any kind of determination whatsoever. And yet, you know, these are things, this is something you do to study. This is something you do. You sit down and you go, oh, okay, well, they've got hypertension. Oh, they've, you know, they're this age, and they go, oh, well, it could be this. But if it's that, then we would see this thing. Do we see that thing? Oh, no, we don't see that thing. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's valuable to just remember that other people are also knowledgeable on things too, and just shut up for a second, let them talk. Like,
And it's
helpful.
okay. And it's okay to try new things. It's okay to try different methods. And just know that you might look stupid sometimes when you're learning something for the first time, especially if I feel safe talking about science, like SR was just saying, like someone gives me a medical problem, I'm happy. I'm happy here.
Yeah.
Like I could do this all day.
Stats too.
Yeah,
you love those.
I do love my stats. Like you take me out of that comfort zone for me, put me into a philosophical debate about morality, and I'm going to struggle a little bit, but it's okay to learn. And I just understand that that's an area that I need practice in, and I'm not going to be very good at first. But like SR and I will be talking, like over chats, and I'll be like, "Hey, I got in this debate on Twitter, and here's what I'm thinking is happening. Did I approach this in a way that makes sense, or is there something like, am I missing something in this argument?" And SR will tell me like what he thinks about it. And like, I have people that I can go to tell me if I'm approaching it correctly because that's SR's comfort zone. He is happy and can sit in the philosophy pool with the bros all day. Like I can't do that, but he can. So like, and I'm not ashamed to admit when that like I'm willing to try to have that kind of discussion, but that I'm still learning and that I might not always be correct. And sometimes I do need some help in learning it. but that's okay. Like we all do that. Just maybe like, and I'm not saying like don't. I mean, if you want to be outside your comfort zone on like a big call-in show, that is your prerogative. But I mean, my recommendation is maybe try the new things in smaller groups of people, um, and then save your best things for when you're on a show that people are going to be judging you for eternity on. But I mean, that's just my 2 cents. But I mean, you do what you want. If you want to, if you want to flounder on here, that's fine. You can do that. But
it depends on what type of night people are interested in having. I guess it's always the. But yeah, I remember one time I was out with a couple of buddies. We were out grabbing some food and drink, and a conversation started happening, and I'm logicking this guy, and I'm throwing out, oh, you're reasoning here, and oh, non sequitur that, and oh, fallacy, whatever. But then he mentioned something that had to do with the way that benzodiazepines, interacted with your body. And I just had nothing to say.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that. I don't understand that, And so that I reached out to Ben, and I was like, man, I don't understand about this. What's going on here? How is this working? And he goes, well, hang on, let me pull this up real quick. And then I think you ended up pulling up like 4 or 5 different like papers or studies or
I
something.
probably
That
did.
one particular. But it's really helpful. We've gotten far afield. What do we have any more?
Yeah.
Do we have any more?
We have a question
aliens?
from Richard that I wanted to address. Have either of you had any alien visitor calls that you have found compelling? Not that I have found compelling, no.
Nope. I've had some that are more, some that adhere more to these things, right? That we're harping on here. Some that seems as if somebody has gone through that SOAP, before the show, maybe twice before the show, even somebody that is really focusing on not falling prey to some of the really easy fallacies to fall prey to. Like I've had some claims that are just better than other claims, right? Like the guy who calls in and says, I have an alien right next to me here, let me put him on. Like that's not, that's a really bad claim. But no, I am not compelled by any of the claims to accept that aliens are actually interacting with us, which again is where it gets fun, is where it's important, right? If the aliens are just out there doing stuff, flying around and not talking to us and messing with us, then who cares? But not.
This is a
don't believe in aliens.
Time for me to get on my soapbox that I wanted to get on today because it's been bugging me for weeks. Stats. We're gonna talk stats. Of course. I mean, and this leads into the question because, like, no, I've not had anybody who's had a convincing argument. But there are some things that would potentially convince me, and it's in the way of stats. And I need to see these stats. Like, and this bugs me because I'm going to get way more aggressive with people who claim a certain probability or claim a certain likelihood, even if they say something like it is more likely that this, or it is less likely that this, because that is a claim. And they're smuggling these in, and people aren't saying anything about them with the exception of Shannon Q. She gets on people's cases with stats all the time. But I think Shannon and I are kind of like the stats people of the colleges. But like those are claims, and I'm going to get more aggressive about not letting people just slide those in and be able to say that something is more likely or less likely. Because most of the time they don't know. There's math that has to be done to demonstrate how likely it is. And especially the worst ones are when they give a percentage, like they say, like I am 95% confident that this is true. Like how how did you arrive at that 95%? Because that is a big claim. And that tells me that you did math or somebody did math to get this number. And
Yeah.
I've had videos about confidence because there is a definition for confidence. And it relates to the average that you get in of the bell curve. If you're saying a 95% confidence, that refers to the range of the averages. Like 95% of the population would fall into that 95%. And so the 5% outside of that would be considered extraordinary. So that's what we're saying with confidence. It has to be demonstrated. And if someone said that this is or like that this is 95% likely or this is more likely or less likely or that I am this confident and they showed me their calculations, I'm interested now. Now I am interested because you understand the math. And I mean, and then I have something to work off of because then I can evaluate your math, see if you've made any errors or if you've used the terms like they should be. But there's something to be said about someone who puts in that kind of work for one and understands likelihood. And it's also kind of a gotcha because I know that many of these people, I have not had a single caller that has had the stats, and it's fun. So I'm waiting. I need one. Call in to one of these shows and bring me the stats because I'm waiting for you.
Are you saying that sometimes some people make absolute wild BS claims? Is that what you're telling us, Ben? Is that what you're telling us right now?
But like when someone says I'm 95% confident, how did you get there? Yeah. And they're usually not prepared for that because they're so used to being able to throw that out and just letting it slide. It ain't gonna slide anymore, people, because we're gonna call it out.
So are you saying that like confidence is not just a feeling? Like I feel 95% confident, about some things. You're saying there is more to it than just kind of this tingly sensation in my tummy?
Yeah, and I think maybe we have a different definition across like philosophy and science, but I think how we mitigate this and how we know what they're saying, like if you are using confidence to say that you are convinced of something, why do you need to put a number in front of it?
Yeah.
You don't need that number to say that I am convinced of something, because I think once you apply the number, you are then implying some math. And I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, I think I think, yeah, kind of exactly where you were going is a good spot, which is what we're trying to say, the actual meaning of the statement, I am 95% confident in the very colloquial sense of it, right? Is trying to just say, I accept this thing and I accept it on such a level that I would accept many other things, right? Like I also believe like I have hands and I'd say, I'm up there, man. Like it's going to take a lot to make me think I don't have two hands right now. The need for a number is to try to bolster that feeling, that acceptance, I think. Exactly like you were saying, it tries to lend credibility to the rest of the statement, which is really just, I accept this thing. And by saying, well, I'm like 50% confident, what you're telling people is, oh, I don't really accept this, right? I'm like 95% confident. Oh, I accept this. But again, saying I am confident of this isn't necessary to add that number unless you're trying to indicate that the claim is more bolstered for some reason, right? Because nobody would say they're 27% confident, right?
Unless
Like
they calculated that out.
well, right,
Probably.
unless they literally did the math for it, but nobody would say like, I know this cup is here. I'm 27% confident about it. It's like that doesn't make any sense, right? That's just counter.
But I think that we can use this, the fact that they used a number and the simple question of how did you arrive at that number? I think it can tell us their perspective as well, because if they respond to, because that question doesn't imply that you're asking for math necessarily. It doesn't imply that you're asking for philosophy necessarily either. But it just says like, how did you arrive at this number? Like it's bringing the number into question, and then if they're not really interested in doing the math and they are using it more colloquially, they can say, well, I got to the 95 because I'm more confident in this than I am about the sky being purple. Like,
Right.
okay, so at least now you've set parameters and you've defined some terms. And
Right.
that also, the fact that you described it in that way, like going back to things being subjective and how you can use the way someone says things to determine where they're going. Like when they describe it in that way, you might want to head on more of a philosophy logic direction because that's where they're thinking. But if they respond with, I got to 95% because that's what the studies say, or I got there because I compared the likelihood of this and like something else that's scientific, or I did this study.
Right.
That tells me they're heading into science land. And then definitely I want some stats. If they're heading into science land, give me your damn stats because I will not accept it without it. So
I'm just imagining like a theme park called Science Land, you know? It's just like, yeah, just little kids running around skipping. Mom, I want to put the wire in the potato clock.
I went to a children's museum with one of my friends not too long ago.
Okay.
It was like a children's science museum, and I was just like, this is really fun. I was like, well, the whole thing wasn't like, the whole museum wasn't like children's necessarily, but like there's one section that was, and it was like, it's like a human body thing. It was like the science of the human body, but it's all meant for children because you're not going to take the kids to the cadaver exhibits. Like
that's probably wise. Yeah. And I'm glad you clarified. I was going to ask if it was science for children or science from children, because I got to be honest.
No, but it's like,
museum
it's
of
like,
the second one.
So everything was put in like fun models and diagrams and things that make sense for kids, and like, no, it's super fun.
It's how I still explain how the body works. I just imagine a couple of cartoons from like Schoolhouse Rock days. So.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. But anything else that you want to bring up about this topic? This whole thing has brought up some ideas for future topics that I want to talk about, which I'll tell you about afterwards because I got an idea if I remember it. But kind of takeaways from this. Where do we go from here?
Well, again, I think as with all of this, as with all of these types of discussions, no matter what you're focused on, it's always very important to know that we aren't equivocating, right? And you brought that up even in the discussion about confidence, right? If we're using a particular definition of aliens, it's important. If we're using a definition of aliens to say just some microbe somewhere out there in the galaxy, you know, well, that is going to really matter when it comes to what ultimately we're saying has occurred, right? Yesterday, somebody had an encounter with an alien, and then we come to find out what they mean it was a microbe on a comet. It's like, well, okay, so an asteroid landed in your backyard. Wow, that is cool. I don't know you can say that you had an alien encounter. But even from that, it seems to be the only type of alien that's particularly interesting is the ones that are dealing with us. If they're not interacting with us, it's not going to be worth much when it comes to like discussing the falsifiability and stuff. If they never interact with us, how are we going to know? From there, I think honestly, man, I like your methodology with this. I think that is a really, really worthwhile way to try to break down these claims. Um, it's nice to just sit there and just say, hey, man, look, let's think of what else it could have been. Could have been an airplane, right? Or it could have been a vulture, right? Those are some weird looking things up in trees at night times and stuff. Like, I don't know, man. What else could it have been? I think your method on this is a really, really good one. And then again, just always remembering there's a handful of fallacies that are really easy for all of us to fall into. And we do it colloquially where we're just like, I don't know what else it could have been. That doesn't mean that we're literally saying there's no other possibilities. But at the same time, it's just worth remembering, like, how do we know that we've ruled everything out? The answer is we don't. We never will. So,
yeah, definitely. We need to make sure that we are not falling into the same fallacies that we're calling out from other people, because we are just as susceptible. Our brains do the exact same things that other people's brains do. We just end up getting to different conclusions than they do a lot of the time with the same bad logic. So check yourself, make sure you are not making the same mistakes, slow down, think things through. Don't just let things come out of your mouth without knowing where you're going with it, or if it's valid and sound, because both are important. And I didn't even get on my physics soapbox with the aliens, but that's a whole different conversation that we can have later, because we could probably do a whole episode about.
We could do aliens part 2.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more alien related arguments that we can talk about. But yeah, I mean, I'm gonna echo everything that SR just said, and there are plenty of methods to address things in a good way, and there are plenty of methods to address things in a bad way.
Yeah,
I mean, lots of good things out there. You don't need to do one specific method to be smart.
Right.
We're all different, and it is okay.
And it's worth caring about those differences and allowing others to give you that different method and that perspective. That other viewpoint is important. And it's really worth having a conversation with somebody that's very philosophically minded if you're not, you know? Yeah, it may take a minute. There's a handful of times Ben's like, man, I got to tell you about this thing that happened today. And I'll be like, yeah, go for it. And then like he sends like 2 sentences and I'm like, okay, so there's like 4 words in there that I don't understand. What is that? It seems, oh, okay, that's what you're talking. I got you. That's the thing. That's the tube thing in the vein. Gotcha. You know. And
sometimes I send you things that you understand that I'm just totally stupid about. Like, hey, someone said this on Twitter. Is this a fallacy or am I just stupid?
It's okay. It is important to draw from a lot of different sources, and I mean exactly what it says right beneath both of us is just break down the barrier. And whether that's with people that are, you know, coming to the same conclusion as you are, but maybe using a different method, or people that use the same method as you and come to different conclusions. Like, it is important to talk with people that are out there actively saying, yes, aliens interact with me regularly, you know, because some of these claims can be very harmful. And we see this time and time again with a whole handful of stuff, you know, whether it's theological stuff, whether it's aliens, whether it's just trying to erase the culture and history of an entire group of peoples, you know, making archaeological structures. Like what do you say? You saying the Egyptians aren't cool enough to or smart enough to make the pyramids? You're saying the Olmecs aren't cool enough or smart enough to make these big stone heads? Like, come on, man, what's wrong with you? You know. Anyway, I am still very much in the camp, Ben, that aliens are most likely
Most likely.
not
How did you
hanging out with us. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like 98%
98%.
confident on it, Ben. Yeah. I've got
but
some math.
yeah.
It's just off camera. Yeah.
But also, don't be an asshole. And if someone has a different perspective that they're coming from, don't be like, well, you didn't do the science, so you're dumb.
Mhm.
Like, don't be an asshole. Like, try to meet people where they're at. And if you can't approach their perspective in a similar way, maybe call in somebody else who can, or get some tips from somebody else who can. Try to branch out a little bit, but like, don't punch down. Like, you need to punch down on somebody.
Always a good idea. Just, you know what? Just don't even punch. Like, just
Don't even punch.
No purpose unless it is consensual adult activity. Yeah. And you
Yes.
can do that in a lot of different ways. So, I mean, anyway,
Yeah.
we're definitely
Anyway,
about to get off base.
we're about to get off base, so we'll end here. SR, what you got going on?
What do I have going on? I don't know that I have any. This was the thing that I had going on this week, really, like online and stuff. I'm pulling up a schedule, seeing if I have anything. I don't. It looks
Well,
like
you can see SR in like everybody's side chats.
yeah, just randomly hanging out at a bunch of different places. And if for whatever reason there is anybody out there that would like to find me or follow me or whatever, it's just all the things. You could just all the things. Secular Rarity. You'll find me there. I wouldn't advise it. What I would advise though is that you hang out later tonight over
Hell yeah.
on Student Dr. Ben's Twitch channel. So I
Yeah,
know
I'm
there
gonna
are links for that.
share the Twitch because that is what I'm announcing later on 9 p.m. Eastern time. We're taking a break from trivia this week because I have boards coming up, but we are playing bingo. We are playing SDB Twitch bingo. So all of the funny inside jokes that we talk about on over there, I have as bingo boards and bingo cards, and I'll send those out. But I did want to find one that is important. Because SR doesn't have anything to show for himself. But I do have a bingo square that says sexual rarity on it. So
If you don't understand that reference, you will have to come to SDB's Twitch tonight, and
you'll have to come because
yeah,
we got some things on this bingo board, such as long Furby. We've got sexual rarity. We have Beck's cat is one. We have Julie the sentient omni parking lot is one of these. So like all the weird humor that we all know and love is part of this, and we'd love to see you there. Everyone can play, and anytime I get a bingo, I'm gonna do something fun. So you all will find out what that is if you join us. Also, we do not have Rhyme of the Frost Maiden this week because I take the medical boards round 2 on Monday. So I'm going to bed on Sunday and not going to be playing D&D. But also medical myths this week, 2 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. The special guest is Neil the 604 Atheist, and we are talking about GMOs. So definitely want to be there for that. I also got my shirt if anyone wants to see it. We have these on the merch store. It is in the link in the description if you want one. Also, favorite time of the episode is the patrons. Thank you to Reggie, Kevin, B. I got to update that because B goes by Uncle Beck now. And Haney Ball, thank you all for supporting the channel. You are amazing. And thank you everybody in the chat for joining us. And we will see you all hopefully later this evening. Bye, everyone.
See ya.